The first light of dawn found the man already moving through the pre-dawn chill, his breath pluming in the still, cold air. For 12 years, this had been his ritual, a solitary communion with the land that both sustained and imprisoned him. The ranch was more than a property. It was a fortress he had built with his own hands, its boundaries the limits of his world. The silence was a presence, broken only by the lowing of cattle in the distant pastures and the crunch of his boots on the frost-hardened earth. He moved with the economy of motion born from a lifetime of hard work, checking fence lines that needed no checking, his eyes scanning the vast, empty horizon out of habit more than expectation. This emptiness was his achievement, his penance. The memories of what came before, the fire and the smoke and the accusations that had followed him like vengeful ghosts, were kept at bay by the sheer, monotonous labor of each day. The world had forgotten Thaddeus Whitmore, and he had done everything in his power to ensure it stayed that way. The rifle he carried was a tool, like the axe for splitting wood, a part of the landscape of his solitude. He was halfway through the eastern pasture when he saw it, a dark smudge against the weathered gray of a fence post that should have been bare. His steps slowed, then stopped entirely. Every instinct, honed by over a decade of deliberate isolation, screamed a warning. It was a violation, an alien mark on the carefully maintained order of his existence. From 30 feet away, he could make out the shape. It was a person, collapsed against the wood, limbs tangled, dark hair matted, with something that glistened dully in the rising sun. A woman. She was utterly still, her form so slight it seemed the wind might yet carry her away. His grip tightened on the rifle. The calculation was instantaneous and cold. To approach was to invite complication, to shatter the fragile piece he had carved from this hard land. To turn away was to preserve it. He stood frozen, a statue in the vastness of his domain, weighing the value of his silence against the weight of a single broken life. For 12 years, he had chosen silence. But as he watched, the figure stirred, a faint, pained shift that was more felt than seen. A sound, so soft it was barely more than a sigh, reached him on the still air. It was the sound of utter exhaustion, of a spirit pushed to its absolute limit. And in that sound, something long buried within him shifted in response. He found his feet moving, carrying him forward one deliberate step at a time, closing the distance he had so meticulously maintained for so long. His shadow fell across her, and her eyes opened. They were a startling green, vivid against the pallor of her skin, and they fixed on him with an intensity that was both fearful and resolute. She tried to speak, her lips moving, but no sound emerged. He crouched down, the rifle held loosely but ready, a barrier of wood and steel between them even as he entered her space. Up close, the story of her ordeal was written plainly upon her. Her dress was torn, not from rough travel, but from violence. A dark stain spread from a wound at her side, and her arms were a canvas of cuts and blossoming bruises. This was not a simple accident. This was the work of other men. She managed a single, raw whisper, "They're coming." The words hung in the air between them, simple and absolute. They changed everything. His peace, his isolation, his carefully constructed world. It was all conditional, and the condition had just been violated. If someone was hunting her, then they were hunting for this piece of land, for this very fence line. His sanctuary was about to become a battlefield, whether he stood on it or not. He rose to his feet, his gaze sweeping the horizon. For a long moment, he looked from the wounded woman at his feet to the empty plains, from the complication of mercy to the simple clarity of self-preservation. Then he made his choice. He bent, slipping an arm under her shoulders and another under her knees, lifting her with a grunt of effort. She was lighter than he expected, frighteningly fragile. Her name, she whispered as he carried her toward the house, was Seraphina Caldwell. Sarah. He did not give his in return. The house was a low, solid structure of logs and determination. Inside it was Spartan, functional, a reflection of the man himself. He went directly to a heavy rug in the kitchen, kicking it aside to reveal a trapdoor set into the floorboards. The root cellar beneath was dark and cool, a space he had built for a catastrophe he had hoped would never come. He helped her down the rough-hewn ladder, his hands surprisingly gentle despite the urgency. "Tend to your wounds," he instructed, his voice low and gravelly from disuse. "There are bandages, water. No matter what you hear, you stay quiet." Her hand shot out, gripping his wrist with a strength that belied her condition. Her eyes searched his face, genuine confusion in their green depths. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." He looked at her, at the dirt and blood and the unwavering will in her gaze, and saw an echo of his own past self. "Maybe I recognize the look of someone with nowhere else to go," he said, and closed the door, plunging her into darkness. He had just replaced the rug when the sound of hoofbeats reached him, no longer a threat on the wind, but a drumbeat of impending violence. He moved to the window, his rifle held tight. For riders crested the hill, their forms sharp and menacing against the brightening sky. They spread out with the practiced ease of wolves surrounding prey. The leader, a tall man with a scar that bisected his jaw, reined in his horse 50 yards from the house. His eyes, cold and assessing, scanned the property before settling on the man now standing on the porch. The confrontation was brief, a tense exchange of lies and veiled threats. The man, Cain Murdoch, asked about a woman. Thorn, for that was the name he had given her, denied having seen anyone. But Murdoch's eyes were sharp. He saw the blood on the fence post, the subtle signs of disturbance. He demanded to search the property. Thorn, outnumbered and knowing refusal would mean an immediate gunfight, gave a curt nod. As Murdoch dismounted and approached the porch, Thorn saw the red clay caked on his boots, the same distinctive clay from the Henderson claim near Dead Rock Canyon. Sarah's story was true. These men were not just trackers, they were murderers. The search was a slow, deliberate torture. Thorn watched, his heart a cold stone in his chest, as one of the men, a tracker named Curtis, began to follow the droplets of Sarah's blood that led from the fence toward the house. The trail was faint, but to a skilled eye, it was a path leading directly to his secret. The tension stretched, a wire pulled taut. Then a distraction, a lone rider, a messenger from Dead Rock, arrived with news of a sheriff asking questions. For a moment, Thorn thought the danger had passed. But Murdoch's desperation had only deepened. Curtis pointed to the blood trail leading to the front door. "She's here," he said. The words were a death sentence. Murdoch drew his gun, his demand for her surrender ringing in the quiet morning. Thorn saw the certainty of death in the man's eyes. To hand her over was to sign her death warrant and likely his own. To fight was to almost certainly die. The gunshot's echo seemed to hang in the air, a permanent scar on the morning's quiet. In its wake, time fractured into a series of sharp, discrete moments. Thorn was already moving, his body operating on a memory of violence he had tried to bury. He worked the rifle's lever action, the spent cartridge clattering on the porch boards, a fresh round sliding home with a solid metallic click. Murdoch, reacting with feral speed, dove behind his horse, using the panicked animal as a shield. The other two men scattered, one sprinting for the dubious cover of the water trough, the other flattening himself against the rough-hewn wall of the barn. The world had shrunk to the 50-yard circle of dirt and buildings in front of the house. Thorn's mind, so long accustomed to the slow, predictable rhythms of the seasons, now raced, calculating angles of fire, counting shots, assessing cover. He was a rancher, but in another life he had been a soldier, and that man now reasserted himself with brutal efficiency. He fired again, the bullet splintering the wood of the trough, forcing the man behind it to scramble backward. Murdoch shouted something, a threat or a promise, but the words were lost in the ringing in Thorn's ears. His focus was absolute. This was no longer about a stranger. It was about the fundamental violation of his home. These men had brought their filth onto his land, and he would cleanse it with blood if he had to. Then he heard the sound he had dreaded most, the faint creak of the trapdoor opening in the kitchen behind him. A spike of pure fear, sharper than any concern for his own safety, lanced through him. "Don't," he hissed over his shoulder, but it was too late. A moment later, Sarah was beside him, pale and trembling, but with a pistol gripped firmly in both hands. It was his spare Colt, taken from the cellar supplies. Her presence was a complication he could not afford, a vulnerability in his defensive position. Murdoch saw her and laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "That's right, girl. Come on out." Sarah ignored him, her attention on Thorn. "They killed a little girl," she whispered, her voice thick with a pain that had nothing to do with her wounds. Sarah Henderson. She was 8. The name, the age, they landed on Thorn with physical weight. This abstract conflict suddenly crystallized into something stark and moral. It was no longer about territory or peace. It was about the murder of a child. The last vestiges of his hesitation burned away, replaced by a cold, focused rage. He made a quick assessment. His rifle had 3 rounds left. Sarah had 5 in the pistol. Against 3 seasoned killers, it was a hopeless equation for a stand-up fight. But he was on his ground. He knew every inch of it. His eyes darted toward the barn, where he kept the tools of his trade, including the old, volatile mining explosives used for clearing stubborn tree stumps. It was a desperate, dangerous gamble, but it was the only one he had. "Can you keep them busy?" he asked Sarah, his voice low and urgent. She nodded, her jaw set, though a fresh trickle of blood was seeping through the bandage on her arm. He didn't wait for a second confirmation. "For Sarah Henderson," he said, and then he was running, bursting from the relative safety of the porch and into the open ground between the house and the barn. The world became a tunnel. The 30 yards felt like a mile. He heard the crack of Sarah's pistol as she lay down covering fire, a brave but sporadic effort. A bullet kicked up dirt at his heels, then another whistled past his ear. He didn't look back. He dove through the barn's open doorway, rolling into the dim, dusty interior. The air smelled of hay, leather, and oil. He scrambled to the far corner, his hands frantically searching through crates until they closed around the familiar wooden box with its crudely painted skull and crossbones. Inside, 2 sticks of dynamite, their waxed paper wrappings still intact, nestled beside a bundle of fuses. His fingers, clumsy with adrenaline, managed to fit a fuse to one of the sticks. A bullet punched through the barn wall, splinters raining down on him. He struck a match, the flare momentarily blinding in the gloom. The fuse caught with a satisfying hiss and spark. He had 20, maybe 30 seconds. He sprinted back to the barn door, the dynamite feeling obscenely light in his hand, a tiny thing that held the power of complete destruction. He saw Sarah, still holding her position, but now there was blood streaking her arm from a fresh graze. Murdoch was advancing, using the chaos of her covering fire and his own men's shots to move closer to the house. Thorn took a breath, stepped out, and hurled the dynamite with a smooth, underhand toss. It arced through the air, a spinning cylinder of impending doom, landing near the water trough where one of the gunmen was pinned. The explosion was a physical force, a deafening roar that sucked the air from the ranch and replaced it with a storm of dirt, wood, and metal. The water trough vanished, replaced by a crater. When the dust began to settle, one man lay motionless. The other was crawling away, clutching a mangled arm. But Murdoch had used the blast as his own cover. He was now at the base of the porch steps, his gun aimed directly at Sarah's head. Thorn froze, his rifle half raised. The distance between them was an unbridgeable chasm. He saw the triumph in Murdoch's eyes, the certainty of his victory. He saw the acceptance in Sarah's, her body braced for the end. Murdoch's finger tightened on the trigger, and Thorn let the second stick of dynamite, the one he had lit the moment he threw the first, roll from his hand. It tumbled down the slight incline of the yard, coming to a stop a few feet from Murdoch. The killer's eyes dropped, his expression shifting from triumph to sheer, uncomprehending horror. He had a split second to choose between his kill and his life. He chose wrong. The second blast was even more violent than the first, centered as it was on the hard-packed earth near the porch. It lifted Murdoch off his feet and threw him backward like a rag doll. The concussion wave hit Thorn like a physical blow. When the silence returned, it was profound, broken only by the crackle of small fires and the panicked lowing of the cattle. Smoke and dust hung thick in the air. Thorn walked forward, his rifle ready, his eyes stinging. Murdoch lay in a broken heap, his gun several feet away. The surviving gunman was gone, having fled into the plains. Sarah was still on the porch, shaken, covered in dust, but alive. She looked at him, her green eyes wide in a face pale with shock. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice small. Thorne looked at the devastation, the cratered earth, the shattered porch, the bodies, and then back at her. This was the price of his intervention. This was the end of his peace. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "It's over." The silence that settled over the ranch in the aftermath of the explosions was heavier and more profound than any that had come before. It was a silence of exhaustion, of shock, of the world holding its breath. Thorne stood for a long moment, his body thrumming with spent adrenaline, the acrid smell of gunpowder and dynamite clogging his nostrils. The scene before him was one of utter devastation. His porch was half destroyed, his yard cratered, and 2 men lay dead on the dirt that he had, until this morning, considered his sanctuary. The third had fled, a witness to the violence that would now be forever attached to this place. His isolation was irrevocably broken. He walked slowly toward the porch where Sarah still sat, her back against a splintered post, the Colt lying uselessly beside her. Her breathing was shallow, and the makeshift bandage on her side was now fully saturated with blood, a dark, ominous red against the faded fabric of her dress. The graze on her arm still seeped. The fierce determination that had carried her through the fight had evaporated, leaving behind the raw reality of her injuries. She looked up at him, her eyes hazy with pain. He crouched in front of her, his own movements stiff. The ghost of the soldier he had been receded, and the rancher returned, assessing the practicalities of survival. "We need to get you inside," he said, his voice low. She nodded weakly, unable to speak. He slipped an arm around her, lifting her with care. She was even lighter now, a bundle of bones and pain. He carried her into the house, stepping over the wreckage of the front door, and laid her on the narrow bed in his own Spartan room. The space was foreign to her presence, its stark utility a contrast to her fragile humanity. For the next hour, he worked with a quiet, methodical efficiency. He built up the fire in the stove, heating water. He retrieved the proper medical supplies from the root cellar, clean bandages, a bottle of whiskey, a needle and thread. He had learned field medicine the same way he had learned violence, out of necessity in a world that offered no second chances. When he returned to her side, she was shivering, her skin clammy. He knew the signs of shock, of blood loss. "This will hurt," he warned, his voice devoid of inflection. He poured whiskey onto a clean cloth and began to clean the wound on her side. She gasped, her back arching off the bed, her fingers digging into the rough wool blanket. But she did not cry out. She endured the pain with a silent, gritted-teeth fortitude that he found himself respecting. The wound was a deep, ugly gash, likely from a knife. It needed stitching. His hands, which could be so brutal, were surprisingly deft with the needle. He worked quickly, pulling the torn flesh together, each stitch a small act of reparation for the violence that had been visited upon her. She watched his face through half-lidded eyes, studying the hard planes and the deep-set lines around his eyes, seeing not the ruthless fighter from the yard, but a man focused entirely on the task of mending. When he was finished, he bandaged the wound tightly, then tended to the graze on her arm. He helped her sip some of the whiskey, the liquid making her cough, but bringing a faint touch of color back to her cheeks. Only when the immediate danger had passed did he allow himself to step back, to clean his own hands, to process the cataclysm that had upended his life. He left her to rest and walked back outside. The sun was higher now, its light pitiless and clear, illuminating the destruction in stark detail. He began the grim task of dealing with the dead. He dragged the bodies of Curtis and the other gunmen to a spare patch of ground behind the barn. It was hard, ugly work, the weight of the dead men a tangible burden. He did not search them. He wanted no connection to their lives, no knowledge of who they had been. They were simply a problem to be disposed of, a consequence of the choices made that morning. He retrieved a shovel and began to dig. The earth was hard, unyielding, and the labor was a penance. Each thrust of the shovel into the dirt was a reminder of the finality of it all. He buried them in a single unmarked grave, a stark testament to the day his fence line had become a border between his past and an uncertain future. Murdoch's body he left for last. The dynamite had done its work with brutal efficiency. Thorne felt no triumph, only a cold, hollow satisfaction. This man had chosen his path, and it had led here, to a lonely ranch at the edge of nowhere. He buried him separately, a few yards from the others. By the time he was finished, his muscles screamed and his shirt was soaked with sweat. He stood over the 2 mounds of fresh-turned earth, the shovel gripped in his raw hands. This was the new foundation of his peace, built on violence and death. He looked toward the house, where the woman, Sarah, slept. She was the catalyst, the spark that had ignited this powder keg. And yet, as he stood there amid the ruins of his solitude, he found he could not summon any anger toward her. She was a victim, just as he had once been a victim. The world's cruelty had simply found a new path to his door. He spent the rest of the afternoon beginning the repairs. He nailed boards over the shattered parts of the porch, filled the smaller holes in the walls, and tried to bring a semblance of order back to the chaos. It was physical, mindless work, and he lost himself in it. As evening drew on, he went inside to check on Sarah. She was awake, her eyes clearer now, watching him from the bed. He brought her a bowl of broth and some hardtack. She ate slowly, her strength returning by small degrees. They did not speak of the fight or the dead men or the future. There were no words yet for what had happened. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with the shared, unspoken understanding of those who have faced death together and survived. He made a pallet for himself on the floor by the stove, the rifle within easy reach. Sleep was a long time coming. He lay in the dark, listening to the sound of her breathing, a soft, rhythmic counterpoint to the familiar creaks of the house. The world outside was the same, yet utterly transformed. His 12 years of silence were over. He had chosen to get involved, and in doing so, he had rediscovered a part of himself he thought was lost forever. The cost had been high, but as he finally drifted into a troubled sleep, he knew, with a certainty that surprised him, that he would make the same choice again. The 3 days that followed were a strange, suspended interval, a pocket of quiet between the storm of violence and the inevitable reckoning to come. The rhythm of the ranch reasserted itself, but it was a different rhythm now, punctuated by the sounds of repair and the presence of another. Thorne rose at dawn as always, but his first action was no longer to walk the fence lines alone. His first action was to check on Sarah. Her recovery was slow but steady. The fever that had threatened after the fight had broken, and color was gradually returning to her cheeks. She spent her days propped up in bed or in the single chair by the window, watching him work. At first, their interactions were minimal, confined to the necessities of food and medicine. Thorne was a man of few words, and the habit of a decade was not easily broken. He would bring her meals, change her bandages with a clinical detachment that was somehow more comforting than pity, and then retreat outside to the endless task of restoring his property. Sarah, for her part, was content with the silence. She was healing not just her body, but her spirit. The constant, gnawing fear that had been her companion for days began to loosen its grip in the solid, unchanging reality of the ranch. The simple acts of kindness, the hot food, the clean bandages, the unspoken protection, were a balm. On the second day, she began to talk. It started in small, hesitant bursts. She commented on the quality of the light over the plains, the stubbornness of a particular bull he was trying to corral, the way the wind sounded different here than in the canyon lands. Thorne would listen, offering only a grunt or a nod in response. But he was listening. He learned that she had been a seamstress in Dead Rock, a trade she had learned from her mother. She had no family left. She spoke of the Hendersons, not of their murders, but of the little girl, Sarah, for whom she was named, and how the child had loved the yellow wildflowers that grew near their claim. She spoke of the normal human things that had been obliterated by a single act of greed. Thorne offered nothing of himself in return. His past was a locked room, and he had thrown away the key. but he found himself increasingly aware of her presence in the house. The space felt different. It was no longer just a shelter. It was becoming a home again, a concept he had long since abandoned. On the morning of the third day, she was strong enough to stand and shuffle to the table for a meal. She sat across from him, slowly eating a bowl of oatmeal. The silence was comfortable now, filled with the companionable sounds of eating and the morning chores waiting to be done. "Thank you," she said quietly, her eyes on her bowl. "For what?" he asked, his voice rough. "For not leaving me at the fence." He looked up, meeting her gaze. The raw gratitude in her eyes was unsettling. "Wouldn't have been right," he muttered, looking away. "Many men would have thought it was the smart thing to do," she persisted. "I'm not many men." A faint, almost smile touched her lips. "No," she said softly, "you are not." Later that day, he was repairing the hinge on the barn door when he saw her standing in the doorway of the house, leaning against the jamb for support. She was looking out toward the two graves behind the barn. Her expression was not one of horror or fear, but of a deep, weary sadness. He walked over to her. "They deserve what they got," he said, a defensive edge to his voice. She nodded slowly. "I know, but it's a terrible thing all the same. So much death. For what? A vein of silver." Her philosophical tone surprised him. He had expected relief, perhaps, or vindication, not this melancholy acceptance. "The world is full of terrible things," he said. "Sometimes you have to meet them with more of the same." "Is that what you learned?" "Before you came here." It was the first time she had directly asked about his past. The walls went up immediately, his posture stiffening, his face closing off. "The past is past," he said, his tone final. She accepted the rebuff without argument, simply turning her gaze back to the wide, empty sky. "It doesn't have to be," she said, so quietly he almost didn't hear. "Sometimes the past is just a room you've locked yourself in." Her words struck a chord deep within him, a dissonant note that vibrated in the silence he had cultivated for so long. He had no answer for her. He went back to his work, but her observation lingered in the air, as tangible as the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. That evening, as he was banking the fire in the stove, he surprised himself by speaking without prompting. "I had a family once." The words felt foreign on his tongue. Sarah, who was weaving a loose thread back into the hem of her dress, stilled her hands but did not look up, giving him the space to speak. "A wife, a son." He stopped the old, familiar pain, dulled by time but never gone, tightening his throat. The memory of the fire, the acrid smell of smoke that was not from dynamite but from his own burning home, the accusations from his neighbors that he had been careless, that his temper had finally cost him everything, all rose up like a flood. "There was a fire," he forced out. "I wasn't there. I was away, working." He could not bring himself to say he had been in jail overnight after a drunken brawl, a fact that had sealed the town's judgment against him. They didn't get out. The silence in the room was heavy, but it was not accusatory. It was a silence of shared grief. "I am sorry, Thorne," she said, and the sound of his name on her lips, spoken with such genuine compassion, was almost his undoing. He gave a sharp, jerky nod, unable to speak further. He had opened the door just a crack, and the draft from that dark room was cold. But as he lay on his pallet that night, he realized that the act of speaking it, of sharing the burden with another soul, had somehow lessened its weight. The lock on the room had not been broken, but a key had been fashioned. On the horizon of the third day, a dust cloud appeared. Thorne saw it from the roof, where he was replacing shingles blown loose by the blast. He climbed down, his movements deliberate. He checked his rifle, making sure it was clean and loaded. The reckoning was here. He walked inside and looked at Sarah. "Riders coming," he said. "Probably the law." Her face paled slightly, but she nodded, squaring her shoulders. "I'm ready." He saw the fear in her eyes, but also the resolve. She would face whatever came next. He helped her to the chair by the window, and then took his place on the porch, not as a defender this time, but as a man waiting to give an account of his actions. The group of riders, led by a man with a silver star pinned to his vest, approached at a walk, their eyes taking in the battle-scarred property with grim understanding. The years of peace were over. The future, whatever it held, was beginning now. The law arrived not with the thunder of a posse seeking vengeance, but with the weary deliberation of men tasked with cleaning up a mess they had long feared was coming. Sheriff Morrison from Dead Rock Canyon was a man in his 50s, with a face weathered by sun and responsibility and eyes that had seen too much of the territory's casual cruelty. He reined in his horse a respectful distance from the porch, his gaze sweeping over the patched-up wood, the fresh-turned earth behind the barn, and finally coming to rest on Thorne, who stood waiting, his posture relaxed, but his rifle within easy reach. The sheriff dismounted, handing his reins to one of his 2 deputies. "Thaddeus Whitmore," Morrison said, his voice neutral. It wasn't a question. "Sheriff," Thorne replied with a curt nod. "Heard the name. Never had cause to ride out this far before." "Had no cause to be visited," Thorne said. Morrison's eyes flickered toward the graves. "Looks like that changed." He stepped onto the porch, his boots sounding loud on the new planks. "We found what was left of Murdoch's gang near the Henderson place. What we didn't find was Murdoch himself, or the woman who witnessed what happened there. A young fella named Jem said Murdoch tracked her here." "He did," Thorne confirmed. And he's in the ground behind the barn, along with 2 of his men." The sheriff absorbed this, his expression unreadable. "The woman?" "Inside, healing." Morrison nodded slowly. "Mind if we have a look?" Thorne stepped aside, and the sheriff entered the house. His eyes took in the sparse interior, the mended roof, and finally settled on Sarah, who sat upright in the chair, her hands folded in her lap, her chin held high despite the pallor of her skin. "Ma'am," Morrison said, tipping his hat. "I'm Sheriff Morrison. I'd like to hear what happened from the beginning." And so Sarah told her story. She spoke clearly and without embellishment, from her trip to the Henderson claim to buy fabric, to the sudden arrival of Murdoch and his men, the cold-blooded murder of the family over a rich silver sample, her desperate flight through the night, and her collapse at Thorne's fence. She described the standoff, the gunfight, the explosions. She left nothing out, her voice gaining strength as she spoke, the act of testifying becoming a form of catharsis. Thorne stood by the door, silent, letting her words paint the picture. When she finished, the room was quiet. One of the deputies had come in to listen, his young face a mask of horror. Morrison sighed a long, weary exhalation. "I believe you, Miss Caldwell. The Hendersons were good people. We found the silver sample hidden in Murdoch's saddlebag back in town. Seems you were the only one with the courage to do something about it." He turned to Thorne. "And you protected a citizen and dispatched a known killer and his gang. By the laws of this territory, you acted within your rights." He paused, his gaze sharpening. "But your name has a history, Whitmore. Some from the old days might wonder why a man with your reputation chose to hide out here for so long." Thorne met his gaze squarely. The past was at the door, and he could no longer keep it locked out. "A man doesn't always choose his reputation, Sheriff. Sometimes it's chosen for him. I came here for peace." "And you found a war instead," Morrison finished for him. "Seems you handled it about as well as anyone could have. Words already spreading. You might find you're a hero to some folks. They'll be coming by, shaking your hand. Might even want you to run for sheriff." The idea was so alien, so antithetical to everything Thorne had built his life upon, that he almost laughed. "I'm a rancher. Nothing more." "We'll see," Morrison said, a knowing look in his eye. He had his men exhume the bodies for identification and transport back to Dead Rock. As they worked, the sheriff took Thorne aside. "That woman in there," he said, nodding toward the house. "She's got no one, no family in the territory. I can take her to Denver, get her set up with a new life, a new name if she wants it. She won't have to worry about Murdoch's ghost there." Thorne looked at the ground, a strange, tight feeling in his chest. It was the logical thing, the safe thing. "I'll tell her the option is there," he said, his voice gruff. After the sheriff and his men had ridden away, taking their grim cargo with them, the silence returned. It was evening again, the sky ablaze with the dying fire of the sun. Thorn and Sarah sat on the rebuilt porch, watching the colors bleed across the horizon. The air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and turned earth. "He offered to take you to Denver," Thorn said finally, breaking the long quiet. "Said he could help you start fresh, where nobody knows your story." Sarah was silent for a long time, her profile outlined in gold by the setting sun. She watched a hawk circling high overhead, a speck of perfect freedom in the vastness. "And you?" she asked softly, without looking at him. "What will you do?" "Same as always, I suppose," he said, the words feeling hollow even to him. "Work the ranch, tend the cattle." He paused, the next words feeling like a leap into an abyss. "Though it occurs to me that this place could use a woman's touch, and maybe some extra hands for the work." He forced himself to look at her. "Are you offering me a job, Thorn Whitmore?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but he heard the faint tremor of hope in it. "I'm offering you a home," he said, the words feeling true and right for the first time in 12 years. "If you want it." Sarah turned to him then, and her smile was like the first break of dawn after a long, frozen night. It transformed her face, erasing the traces of pain and fear, revealing the strength and beauty that lay beneath. "I've been running for so long," she said, her green eyes shining. "I'd forgotten what home felt like." "It feels like this," Thorn said, and he meant it. He meant the solidness of the porch beneath them, the familiar sounds of the land, the shared silence that was no longer empty. For the first time since he had carried her broken body toward this house, he felt not the burden of her presence, but the rightness of it. The ranch was no longer a fortress against the world. It was becoming a sanctuary within it. And he, Thaddeus Whitmore, was no longer just its solitary warden. The change upon the ranch was not a sudden transformation, but a slow, gentle turning, like the seasons themselves. The scars of the gunfight remained, the patched porch, the filled-in craters in the yard that would forever grow grass a little differently. But they faded with time, becoming less like wounds and more like landmarks, part of the history of the place. As Sarah's body healed, so too did her spirit, and she began to weave herself into the fabric of the land with a quiet determination that Thorn could only watch with a sense of awe. She started a small vegetable garden near the house, a splash of green and life where before there had been only hard-packed dirt. She mended his worn clothes with a seamstress's skilled hands, and eventually, using fabric ordered from a catalog and delivered by a now regular supply wagon, she began to make new ones. She brought color into the house, not with paint or finery, but with wildflowers placed in a jar on the table, with a quilt she pieced together from scraps during the long winter evenings. Thorn, in turn, found his own rhythms changing. The silence he had once cherished was now filled with the sound of her voice, the occasional hum of a song she half remembered. He began to speak more, not of the dark past, but of the present, the condition of the cattle, the weather, the plans for a new corral. He taught her to shoot, not with the frantic urgency of the change upon the ranch was not a sudden transformation, but a slow, gentle turning, like the seasons themselves. The scars of the gunfight remained, the patched porch, the filled-in craters in the yard that would forever grow grass a little differently, but they faded with time, becoming less like wounds and more like landmarks, part of the history of the place. As Sarah's body healed, so too did her spirit, and she began to weave herself into the fabric of the land with a quiet determination that Thorn could only watch with a sense of awe. She started a small vegetable garden near the house, a splash of green and life where before there had been only hard-packed dirt. She mended his worn clothes with a seamstress's skilled hands, and eventually, using fabric ordered from a catalog and delivered by a now regular supply wagon, she began to make new ones. She brought color into the house, not with paint or finery, but with wildflowers placed in a jar on the table, with a quilt she pieced together from scraps during the long winter evenings. Thorn, in turn, found his own rhythms changing. The silence he had once cherished was now filled with the sound of her voice, the occasional hum of a song she half remembered. He began to speak more, not of the dark past, but of the present, the condition of the cattle, the weather, the plans for a new corral. He taught her to shoot, not with the frantic urgency of a life-or-death struggle, but with the patient, methodical instruction of a man passing on a necessary skill. Her hands, so deft with a needle, were surprisingly steady with his heavy rifle. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, the needs of the cattle, the way the light changed over the distant mountains, heralding a shift in the weather. She was no longer a guest or a burden. She was a partner. The world, as Sheriff Morrison had predicted, did not forget them entirely. Travelers, having heard the story, would sometimes stop by, their curiosity piqued by the tale of the recluse and the woman he had saved. They found not a fortress, but a home. Thorne, to his own astonishment, would sometimes invite them to share a meal, listening to news from the territories he had long since turned his back on. Sarah's presence acted as a buffer, her gentle grace softening his rough edges, making the interaction possible. The legend of the standoff at Whitmore Ranch grew in the telling, but the reality was far more mundane and far more precious. It was a life being built, day by day, word by word, shared glance by shared glance. The first winter together was a test of a different kind. The snows came early and deep, piling high against the sides of the house, sealing them in a white, silent world for weeks on end. It was during this time, in the intimate confinement of the warm cabin, that the last of the walls between them truly crumbled. He told her, one night as the wind howled outside, the full story of his past. He spoke of his wife, Eleanor, with her laugh that sounded like bells, and his son, Jacob, who had been fascinated by the workings of a pocket watch. He spoke of his own failings, his quick temper, the drunken brawl that had landed him in a cell for a night, the fire that had taken them while he was gone, the weight of a guilt that was both unbearable and inescapable. He did not cry. The tears had been burned out of him long ago, but he let her see the raw, ruined landscape of his heart. Sarah listened, her hand covering his, her silence a deeper comfort than any words could have been. She did not offer empty platitudes or absolve him of a burden that was not hers to lift. She simply bore witness, and in that act of sharing, the ghost of his family, which had haunted him for 12 years, began to slowly, gently, find its rest. They were not forgotten. They were integrated into the story of his life, a story that now included her. When the spring thaw came, it felt like a rebirth for both of them. The world was washed clean, the grass a vibrant green, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth and new growth. It was on a day like this, with the sun warm on their backs, as they worked together to mend a section of fence, that Thorne stopped and looked at her. She was struggling with a stubborn post, her brow furrowed in concentration, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. In that moment, he was struck not by her beauty, which was undeniable, but by her essential, unwavering presence in his life. She was as much a part of this land now as the hills and the sky. He walked over to her, took the heavy post from her hands, and set it aside. He cupped her face in his rough, calloused hands, his thumbs wiping away the dirt smudge. He did not ask her to stay. He knew she already had. He did not speak of love. The word felt too small for what had grown between them, a thing forged in blood and silence and shared survival. He simply looked into her green eyes, which held no fear, no desperation, only a deep and abiding peace. And he said, "You are my home." And she leaned into his touch, her smile the only answer he would ever need. 6 months later, travelers passing through the territory would tell stories of the peaceful ranch where a scarred man and a green-eyed woman had built something beautiful from the ashes of violence. They raised cattle and, in time, 2 children who knew nothing of the blood that had once soaked into the earth of their home. They welcomed strangers and never spoke of the day when a bloodied fence post had changed everything. Thorne kept his rifle cleaned and ready, but he never had to use it again. Some battles, once won, stay won, and some peace, once earned, lasts forever. The ranch that had sheltered one broken soul had become a sanctuary for 2 healing hearts, proving that sometimes the best things in life begin with the courage to help a stranger in need.